Hello, this is my PowerPoint on a topic from Chapter 4. I chose to do search and seizure, and I tried to do it as a PowerPoint that I could use as a presentation to teachers or just for myself to provide some guidelines when getting involved in search and seizures. Um, the primary thing that teachers need to remember is that there is an amendment of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, that protects citizens from unreasonable search and seizure. And even though students are not adults, they are afforded the same protection as adults under certain circumstances. Um, and this is something that's very important to consider as a teacher and an administrator. The Fourth Amendment does apply to students. Even though school officials are charged with managing a safe and efficient learning environment, providing for the safety of all students and staff, which is ISLC Standard 3. At the same time, as administrators and as teachers, we have to be aware of the constitutional rights of students and protect democratic values, and also consider the legal ramifications of our decisions, which is Standard 5. So these are things to consider when getting involved in search and seizures. Um, Another thing to keep in mind is the distinction between personal and school property. Um, you know, Things that belong to students, their bags, vehicles, their person, um, they're afforded more rights, and the justification for a search has to increase. Whereas where it's involving school property, such as lockers or desks, school officials provide a little bit more leeway in their search, in their justification for the search. Really, the primary criteria that must be met when conducting a search is that it must be reasonable. Um, if a search is to be considered reasonable, it will clearly not violate the rights of the students. Also, what is considered reasonable depends on the context of the search. So context is very, very key. In order for a search to be reasonable, the school official must have reasonable suspicion. Um, Reasonable suspicion, you have to have it to begin a search. It's not as high of a standard as probable cause in the legal system or in law enforcement. Um, It has to be based on reliable information from a teacher or from a student. This is really important, this one right here. It cannot be anonymous. It has to have a name attached to it. Administrators or school officials should never conduct a search based on an anonymous tip. Um, the information must seem credible. If all these criteria are met, then school officials may conduct searches based on reasonable suspicion. Um, like many of these legal issues that we're talking about in class, there have been court cases that set precedents. One that applies to search and seizures, New Jersey versus TLO from 1985. And some of the things that were held up by this court case that went to the Supreme Court. School officials must abide by the protections granted by the Fourth Amendment. Um, we have to always consider that. A warrant is not necessary to conduct a search. As I've already mentioned, they must have reasonable grounds for a search, and they have to believe that the search is necessary to prove a student has violated a policy or rule. They have to have that in mind. Sweep searches are not allowable and in fact are illegal. You can't just have a blanket search um, of students or lockers or things like that. You have to have justification. You must have individualized suspicion, both in terms of the person and the violation, meaning that you just can't, on a whim, decide to search somebody. You have to have a specific person and a specific violation in mind. And then the last bullet there, if you don't have that search is indiscriminate, and that's not allowed. Um, Now, some specific situations, student desks, for example, some things to consider when searching them. The standard of reasonableness must be met. as I already talked about, it must be a reasonable search. You cannot rely on a hunch. You must have reliable information. You should have a written policy in place that informs students that they are subject to a search. And in this policy, it should describe under what circumstances desks will be searched. And remember, since desks are considered school property, school officials do have a little bit more leeway in this area. Student lockers are very similar in terms of, you have to have the standard of reasonableness must be met. You must have reliable information, so on and so forth. A couple of key things here is indiscriminate searches are illegal. And then also, the student and at least 2 school officials should be present. This is important because you may be getting into students' private property. You want to make sure that you're covering yourself and not opening yourself up to other issues. That's why it's good to have another official there. This idea of the indiscriminate searches being illegal, that's true unless there's an overriding case such as a bomb threat or another emergency. Then a school official may have a little bit more leeway. Student book bags, because these are considered student property, and it's a little bit more intrusive, therefore the grounds for reasonable suspicion tend to increase too. You need more evidence to establish this. Although there was another court case from New Jersey in 1994 that actually found that a search of book bags of students going on a field trip was permissible in order to prevent students from bringing contraband on the trip. School officials proved that they were concerned about this, that searching bags, a blanket search of bags, would prevent this, and the courts upheld that they were justified. But also, students and parents had been warned ahead of time, which is kind of a key. Student vehicles. Many of these same standards, of reasonableness. You can't rely on a hunch. You have to have reliable information, and again, a written policy should be in place. If you have all this, and then you may search student vehicles on school property. If a vehicle of a student is parked on non-school property, then it becomes an issue for law enforcement, and they have to have probable cause and a warrant, and they're really in charge of the search. The last one that the chapter talked about that I think is really important is personal searches. The book did a real good job of emphasizing this should be a last resort. This is where there's a lot of potential for difficulties arising, and you're opening yourself up to a lot of possible issues. A couple things to consider. It should only be conducted under extreme circumstances when there's really strong evidence that the student has something in their possession that's a danger to themselves or another student or other students. When conducting personal searches, we got to be very careful that we maintain the dignity and respect the privacy of the student being searched. We want to make sure we do it in a private setting. If we're going to pat them down, we want to make sure that we have a person of the same gender doing that with an adult of the same gender present as a witness. If any kind of garments are to be removed, then we need to make sure that's in private and that students have alternative clothing to put on. At all times, again, we must protect student dignity. And really, unless it's a very, very extreme conditions, we don't want to be doing this as a last resort. So these are just some things that I'll look back upon or maybe share with other teachers to kind of help guide me when I get involved in search and seizures. I've never really had this stuff discussed or presented to me. Kind of learned along the way, talking to people, reading, and things like that. So I thought the chapter did a great job of providing these guidelines.